Good morning.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning,
So,
sir.
yeah, so today, we'll take a break from central nervous system. We'll go into something that is called as signal transduction. Okay, I don't know. I think you probably, some of you may have an idea about it. When you say transduction, that means it's a kind of a transfer, isn't it? Or induction, all right, of a signal, all right? And transfer of signal from one cell to the other cell, transfer of information from one cell to another cell is called a signal transduction. Okay. Sometimes it is also called a cell-to-cell signaling, and this is a very important control function that is being, conducted by the. You will see it both in the endocrine system as well as in the nervous system as well. Okay, so it is the, it is the conduction of, rather, it is the passing of the information by secreting some kind of chemicals that are called as chemical signals. All right, so that chemical is secreted by one cell and it is going to, act on another cell and causes some changes in the cell. That can be changes in the permeability of the cell. All right, that can be activation of some enzyme in the cytosol, or that can be also, you know uh, activation of genes. Okay, that means the um, synthesis of protein. All right, new proteins, and but then all these are, occurring as mean to bring about some kind of biological effects. Understand? So it's about, it's about producing some biological effects. And body is made up of many cells, as you know, and many, I mean, cells that form the different types of tissues and, organs. And for a body to function, for have to have a kind of an integral function, right, or to integrate the function of all the organs in the human system, you need to have this kind of mechanism, right, of once the, of of linking them by, transferring this kind of information. Okay, and so that is very important. Okay, so you have nervous system with the brain controlling different parts of the body. That's one way of, nervous system plays a role in controlling in a in a in a unique way. And then you have the endocrine system also that plays a role in controlling in, again, its own unique way. Okay, so you have a system that, blend both. So you can call that system as a neuroendocrine. So you have a neural control system. You may have a neuroendocrine control system, or you may have a completely endocrine type of controlling system. Okay, but then these are all, systems that control the different, activities of the body. Fine. So coming back to signal transduction. So as I've said, it is the transfer of information from one cell to another cell. Okay, and with the intent to produce some kind of biological effects. Okay, so that is what we call a signal transduction. So let's see what is written here. So signal transduction is a process by which a chemical or physical signal is transmitted through a cell as a series of molecular events, most commonly protein phosphorylation. Okay, so signal transduction is something that is occurring in a cell, all right? And how this information that is coming from another cell is being transmitted through the cell membrane into the cytosol and finally into the nucleus, all right, containing all the genes for the synthesis of different proteins, and how, you know that results in the formation of proteins that can, you know behave like enzymes, or sometimes like hormones also themselves, and then produce a number of action within the cell, all right. Or then another information is, it may be within the cell itself, like for example, it may be contraction of the cell, it may be you know uh, or it may be secretion of uh, important chemicals from within the cell, okay, like secretion of hormones. So it can be a number of function that the cell is performed, okay, that can be brought about by transducing the signal that is coming from outside, and that signal is transduced into the cell, right, to initiate a series of molecular events, okay. So mostly is about phosphorylation of proteins. So, and this process, phosphorylation, what we call as phosphorylation, is catalyzed by protein kinases, which ultimately results in cellular responses. So you have it's something like a cascade of cascade of activation of a number of proteins, okay, that eventually then leads to what we call as a cellular response. Any process occurring within the cells that convert one kind of signal stimulus into another type, that is also called signal transduction. It's also called as cell signaling. And as I've said, in some of the literature or some of the text books, you'll find that this is also referred to as the cell-to-cell signaling process. Okay, so it is also known as cell signaling, in which the transmission of molecular signals from cells exterior is conducted into the interior. Signals received by cells must be transmitted effectively into the cell to ensure an appropriate response. This step is initiated by cell surface receptors. So you have receptors on the cell surface, okay, which are activated and then trigger biochemical chain of events inside the cell, finally creating a response, what I call as the biological effects. All right. So that is signal transduction. So you can see here, uh, for this cell signaling to happen, you have three stages. One is the reception of the signal, and two is the transduction of the signal, and finally is the production of the response. Okay, so it's occurring in three stages. One is reception, two is the transduction of the signal, and three is the production of the response. Okay, so this is what is happening. You have a signal here, which is coming, a chemical, we say a chemical messenger, all right, in the form of a hormone, let's say, or some kind of environmental, stimulus, all right, can activate a receptor that is present on the surface of the cell. And then, if it is a hormone, it forms a kind of a complex, which is known as a hormone receptor complex. So, can be a chemical signal receptor complex also. Okay, and then this leads to, once this receptor is activated, it can undergo some kind of conformational changes, resulting in activation of proteins that are linked to these receptors, right? So resulting in reactions producing second messengers. So transduction is about conversion, as a matter of fact. It's a transformation of one form of signal to another form of signal, or we can say one form of energy to another form of energy. So that is happening here. Okay, activation of this result in the formation of second messengers. Okay, again, these are nothing but chemical signals, all right, that finally lead to the activation of cellular responses. Fine. So this is the stages of what we call as cell-to-cell signaling, or cell signaling, or what we call as signal transduction. Okay. So these are the three stages, as I already told you in the last slide. So cell response can lead to gene transcription, cell proliferation, cell division, cell survival. Important for the survival of the cell. Okay, so transduction is nothing but amplification, spreading of the signal down. So that is a very important, term. Amplification is a very important term. So you amplify whatever is coming, binding to the cell. Probably is a small signal, but then that is being amplified here in the process of transduction. Okay, so what is there here is the same, or the same slides I've already shown. So there are some terms that you must know when we talk of signal transduction. Okay, one is that there is a term called as a ligand. So ligand refers to the hormone, or as I've said, to the primary message, which can be environmental, any form of environmental stimulus. That is called as a ligand. That is going to bind to a receptor. So you have a receptor here, forming a kind of I said a receptor ligand complex. Okay. And you'll find that this receptor, as I've said in the last slide, is coupled to a G protein. Say I said it's Lyngdoh protein, so it's coupled to a G protein. So this is a G protein here. When this is activated by the binding of a ligand, all right, to it, then even this is activated. The G protein is activated, which is normally inactive when it is not when the ligand is not binding to the receptor. But the moment the ligand binds to the receptor, this becomes activated. And then the activated G protein results in the activation of enzyme phosphorylation of further of downstream enzymes, and the enzyme results in the conversion of some substrate into second messengers. All right, and these second messengers are going to uh, bring about some changes in the metabolic activity and maybe gene expression. Okay, fine. So this is what is happening in the signal transduction. So how do cells signal? How do cells send signal? So there are 5 types of signaling pathways, and one is something called as contact dependent. That means there has to be a contact between the two cells. All right, the signaling cell and the target cell needs to be in contact, and on both these surfaces we'll have a signal molecule. On one cell, on the signaling cell, you'll have a signal molecule. On the target cell, you'll have a receptor. Okay, so this kind of passage of information or transfer of information is called as a contact dependent, all right, type of signal transduction, and then or contact depending type of signaling. Paracrine is you know something that happens in a neighborhood, let's say. Okay, cells that are lying close by to one another, all right, and the signal is being secreted into the interstitium. All right, so this is the interstitial space, and then it is received by a neighboring cell, resulting in the activation of that neighboring cell. This kind of signaling is this type of signaling is seen in the what we call the islet of Langerhans, the pancreas. Later, when you learn about the control of glucose metabolism, all right, you will come across this kind of this form of signaling, which is called as a paracrine type of signaling. Okay, so where alpha cell and beta cell, they send signal to one another. Okay, in the form of hormones, of course, insulin and glucagon. Okay, and they'll be either activating one another or inhibiting one another. That we'll see when we discuss the control of glucose metabolism. So that is an example of paracrine signaling. Endocrine is what you generally see in the mechanism of action of hormones, and hormones, as you know, is secreted by glands, isn't it? And then it's secreted into the blood, it's carried into the bloodstream, and then it produces action in a distant target cell. Okay, so this kind of signaling, which is where the endocrine cells secrete a chemical messenger and is sent through the blood as a medium and reaches the target cell. This is called endocrine. Then synaptic, which is sometimes called as a neuroendocrine type of signal. Okay, so this we have already seen when we were discussing synapses. So synaptic is an example of what we call as a neurocrine, or sometimes called as a neuroendocrine, type of signaling. Okay. Now this is a question that you need to think of, and all right, why does such a variety of signaling pathways exist? And I think that is a very long topic that will probably require one class of discussion. So anyway, you can look for reasons why we have all these varieties of signaling pathways. Anyway, we will stick to the transduction of the signal. As you can see here, I'm repeating the same thing. All right, a neurotransmitter or a hormone or environmental stimulus binds to a receptor, and here you have the G protein. So what is the G protein? The G protein is nothing but the GTP. These are guanine nucleotide, guanine nucleotides like GDP, okay, which binds to a kind of a trimeric consisting of the alpha, beta, and gamma. Okay, and GDP is always bound to alpha, all right. And what is happening here is that binding of this neurotransmitter to the receptor results, of course, conformational change here, all right, and activation of this complex. Okay. And so what is happening is that once this complex is activated, you'll find that it breaks into two parts. You have a dimeric beta gamma, which forms one part, and the alpha GDP. Okay, which then activate an enzyme that result in the activation of the formation of a second messenger. So an enzyme in this case, let's say in the case of it may be adenylyl cyclase. Adenylyl cyclase is an enzyme that converts AMP to cyclic AMP. Okay, so AMP is converted to cyclic AMP, and cyclic AMP is the second messenger. So this is the amplification of the signal, all right, that is being received by this receptor. Okay, so second messenger will further amplify and result in the activation of a number of proteins, enzymes, and then also bring about some biological changes or responses. Okay, so that can be gene expression, it can be synthesis of new proteins, it can be the effect on the, as I've said earlier, the effect on the cell membrane itself, changing its altering. It's going to alter its permeability. Okay, so altering the permeability of the cell membrane. Okay, and again maybe activation of certain enzymes. Okay, so a number of things will happen when a second messenger is being produced. Okay, so you have a number of cyclic AMP is just one example of a second messenger, but then you have other second messengers that you already have come across. When we were discussing something like myosin light chain kinase, okay, or maybe inositol triphosphate, diacylglycerol. These are all forms of second messengers. Okay, that we will probably see when we discuss further. Anyway, this is the as I've said earlier that signal transduction is dominantly it's a mechanism that dominantly happens in the endocrine system. So when you talk of the endocrine system, you find that there are two types of hormones that is being produced by endocrine glands. So one type is a non-steroid type of hormone, and the other type is a steroid type of hormone. Okay. Okay, and so these are the broad division of the types of hormones. Okay, and you have another type which calls a tyrosine base, type of hormone. So, but then it behaves like a steroid type of hormone. Okay, so we can we can broadly divide these hormones into two types: the non-steroid hormones and the steroid types of hormones. Okay. So hormone, as you know, is the first messenger which activates this receptor. resulting in the activation of enzyme. Actually the enzyme, not AMP but rather ATP. It phosphorylate ATP. Rather, it breaks ATP, not phosphorylate. It breaks and then result in the formation of what we call a cyclic AMP, and this is a second messenger. Okay, so it's a repetition of what we have said earlier. So what I want to emphasize here is that non-steroid hormones binds to a receptor which is present on the cell surface. All right, on the cell surface. That means on the cell membrane. Okay, the receptor for the signal, the first signal, or what we call as the first messenger, is present on the cell membrane. And these are, signals that cannot, cross the lipid bilayer. All right. So the type of, first messengers that behaves like this are basically the protein hormones, protein-based hormones. Okay. What we call as the peptide hormones. All right. So the peptide hormones, they have to, because they cannot cross the lipid bilayer, they have to transduce or transfer the information through the receptor which is present on the cell membrane. But when you look at steroid hormones, you know that steroids, they are they lipid by nature, and so they can they're lipid soluble, and therefore they can cross the lipid bilayer through and through. All right, so they don't require to have a receptor on the cell surface, because they can go in to the cell, right, through the lipid bilayer itself. But then the receptors are found either here in the cytoplasm and the cytosol, or in the nucleus, okay, or in the DNA itself. All right, you'll have the receptor for hormone attachment. So the receptor is said to be the sites for the binding of the receptor is said to be covered by some kind of proteins called heat shock protein. Then activation of this result in the release of the heat shock protein, and the binding of, allows the binding of steroid hormone to the receptor, and then the receptor can, migrate into the, it can be attached to the DNA. This receptor hormone complex can be attached to the DNA. All right, there's something called as a hormone receptor complex. All right, domain. All right, in the DNA. So that when that happens, it is going to result in the transcription of the gene. All right, and mRNA is being formed, and then that is being sent into the ribosomes, where translation will take place, resulting in the formation of new proteins. Okay. Now these new proteins can be acting within the cell, or they can be excreted, or rather secreted by the cell, not excreted, secreted by the cell, and then produce action somewhere else. It may be action in the surrounding, or action in a distant target cell. Okay. So some of the examples of how signal transduction produces some kind of biological effects can be seen as, for example, the effect of oxytocin in uterus. So this is oxytocin, binds to an oxytocin receptor. These are the G proteins, and resulting in the activation of something called as phospholipase C. All right, this phospholipase C is another enzyme that is similar to the adenyl cyclase for the activation of ATP, formation of cyclic AMP. But in this case, activation of phospholipase results in the activation of phosphoinositol diphosphate. All right, which then breaks into two second messengers, which are called as the inositol triphosphate, or IP3, and the diacylglycerol, all right, component. Okay, and these are going to activate downstream enzymes like the protein kinase C. All right, and in case of inositol triphosphate, is going to activate calcium channel. All right, bind the calcium channel, and causes the opening of this channel, and release of calcium from the endoplasmic reticulum, and activation of myosin light chain kinase. As I've said, is another messenger that eventually produces contraction of the uterus. Okay, so this is one example, okay, of how signal transduction, or the transduction of a signal, or the transformation or the transfer of the signal from the exterior to the interior, results in the production of a biological effect. Okay, so this is something that is happening in the uterine muscle, smooth muscle. Okay, so this is uterine smooth muscle, and contraction is being produced by oxytocin binding to the oxytocin receptor, and then whatever is happening we have already discussed, finally resulting into the contraction of the smooth muscle. All right, and this is important in the expulsion of the fetus, and this is one example of signal transduction. How signal transduction leads to the production of a biological effect. So another example here. This oxytocin is a peptide hormone, so it doesn't cross through and through. So it's an example of a peptide hormone. This is another example of a peptide hormone, epinephrine. Okay, same thing here. Okay, finally it leads to the generation of the second messenger. Now that stimulate downstream enzyme known as a protein kinase. Then here, what does it do? In a case of epinephrine, what does it do to a cell? It inhibit glycogen synthesis. This is a muscle cell, and promotion of glycogen breakdown. Okay, so it can be a liver cell or muscle cell in this case. Okay, so this is again another example of how signal transduction result in the production of biological effects. Okay, so steroid hormones will do the same thing, but they're going to cross through and through. They don't require a receptor on the cell surface, because the receptor will be present in the cytosol, or they may directly bind to a receptor in the gene itself. Okay, in the DNA itself. Okay, so when you look at signal transduction, you will find that it's not just the conveyance of the signal to finally produce a response, but you will find that there is feedback pathways that regulate this process also. So the process of amplification of a signal is regulated in a fashion that the hormones are regulated, secretion of hormones are regulated. So you have feedback pathways. Okay, so an increased response would reduce reception. That means there will be a down regulation of receptors. Okay, too much of response would result in a down regulation of receptors. That means receptors are going to reduce in numbers. Okay, but when there is a need for a response, when there is no response, there is a need for a response. There would be an upregulation of the receptors, so that they can convert that signal which is coming from the exterior, all right, and a desired response. Okay, so these are the silent features. The points, the silent points with regards to signal transduction. Initially, be a release of primary messenger, what we call as first messenger, a reception of the primary messenger, delivery of the message inside the cell by the second messenger, not only delivery but amplification as well, activation of the effectors that directly alter the physiological responses, and termination of the signal in this manner. Okay, by invoking the feedback pathways. Okay, these are inhibitory pathways. So this is what we call as signal transduction, or cell signaling, or cell to cell signaling. Is it okay? And this is what you're going to see when you discuss the endocrine system. You're going to see this in a major way. All right. A lot of the mode of action, I would say, of hormones will be following this pattern. Okay. Hormones, the pattern for steroid hormone would be different when it comes to reception, and again for peptide hormone will be different when it comes to reception. But the rest would be almost similar. Okay. So I think that is the end of today's class. Anything that needs to be clarified? Most of these things are not there in your textbook. I've taken from here and there. But then you go to your textbook, you find the same thing only, but presented in a different way. Clear, clear. But it's the same thing. Probably there's a thing that may not be there in your textbook is these stages. But when you read the signal process of signal transduction, even these stages are obvious, though they are not divided or categorized into different stages, but then they will be obviously be understood. All right, that you have different stages in the process of signal transduction. Am I clear?
Yes,
Am I
sir.
clear? Okay. So that is the end of. This is going to be the first part of your endocrine system. Okay, but I'm not going to take endocrine system this time. So Madam will be taking the endocrine system, but I've been told to take this part, the signal transduction. So I think this should set a pace for you to understand the mode of action of all hormones. Okay, clear? Then,
Yes, sir.
okay,
Yes,
bye.
sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Bye.
Much
Take
more.
care.